Bruneateau, and I'm the founder of the American Influencer Council, and I hope you all have your lunch and you're ready to learn. Today kicks off our Creator Lunch and Learn series, which is a program I'm super excited to kick off. We're talking about a hot topic, morality clauses and the inclusion rider, two contract terms that are super important when negotiating multifaceted brand deals. And we have curated a group of industry thought leaders to share their POV on how creators can leverage these clauses, when to use them, when not to use them, and sort of the context around them. So our Learning and Development Committee really put this event together. And the American Influencer Council is the sole not-for-profit membership trade association in the US, led by and for career creators. And so our mission is really to advance digital marketing education, foster creator-to-creator knowledge sharing, drive think tank development, and curate publicly available business resources, amongst others. And so through our learning and development mission pillar, we're able to bring these type of free resources to creators. And so how did we get to this topic? Alexandra from Business of Fashion is really the one who's been the conversation starter. When I typically see these type of articles, it's normally from a brand POV. So I was super excited that she took on this topic, looking at it from the creator angle. And so I love the title, How Influencers Are Protecting Themselves Against Misbehaving Brands. And even the headline is one that makes you, stop and want to investigate, exactly what's going on here. And I think like if you go back to the early 2000s and you think of Tiger Woods or Kate Moss, you have a lot of celebrities who were the ones sort of, driving conversation around these terms. But when you think about creator deals and the evolution of those deals, creators are definitely the new advertisers of today and warrant the same type of protection of a celebrity or an athlete. And so today we'll really be focusing on how to safeguard your image from unforeseen events and how you can work on co-branded projects that really reflect the world that we live in. And so the inclusion or the equality rider allows for language that can promote diversity and inclusion. And so who do we have on today's webinar? Patrick Janelle, who is an AIC founding member and who I love to call the connoisseur of cool. Patrick's been recognized by the New York Times, The Guardian as a top Instagrammer. He won the inaugural CFDA Instagrammer Award, and he is the founder of Untitled Secret, a talent management and creative agency dedicated to the support and development of artists and content creators. Thanks for joining us, Patrick.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
Next up, we have Summer Albarcha, and I hope I pronounced that right, Summer. Summer is really a thought leader in the modest fashion space. She started a blog really with the teen Gen Z audience in mind to really give modest fashion a new POV. She has over 500,000 Instagram followers and seamlessly leverages her platform to advocate for social equality and modest modernity. Thank you. And next up, we have Shay Lawson, who joins us from Atlanta. Shay is an Atlanta-based intellectual property and entertainment attorney. She has negotiated over $3 million in influencer deals with brands like Nike, Apple, Pandora, AT&T, to name a few. Shay protects the name and legacies of multi-platinum Grammy award-winning artists. Thanks for joining us today, Shay.
Thanks for having me.
And we have Alexandra Megaris on the panel today. She is a partner at Venable. Alexandra focuses on complex regulatory investigations and government enforcement matters involving the State Attorney General, the FTC, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the U.S. Congress.
Thanks for having me.
And Vanessa, who's an AIC organization founding member. She is the EVP of Talent at Digital Brand Architects, where she's responsible for overseeing a world-class portfolio of fashion, beauty, and lifestyle influencers, and she's been with DBA for almost a decade.
Thanks for having me.
And last but not least, the woman who has brought us all together, Alexandra Mondalek from Business of Fashion, who is the Senior Editorial Associate, who recently joined via F and is covering marketing and PR. Her work has been published in Yahoo, Vogue Business, and InStyle.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And so to kick it off, these are clauses that I feel creators, depending on where you are in your journey, might not necessarily have a full knowledge base on, which is why knowledge sharing is so important in our industry. And so I want to first ask Alexandria from Business of Fashion, how did this subject matter first catch your attention? Why did you feel the need to bring this topic to the forefront?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, welcome to everybody who's tuned in, and thanks for watching us all discuss this very important topic today. I would say that this first came to my attention anyway, back in June when Black Lives Matter reignited, and I had originally published a story about, quote, fixing the whitewashed influencer industry. And through those conversations, the topic of inclusivity riders had emerged, and my editors and I thought it was important to really have a story that highlighted how influencers themselves, as well as their teams and their management teams, just like the great people at DDA, are supporting them to sort of tip the power scales in their favor from brands who traditionally have retained most of the power when it comes to creator rights and content rights, as well as terminating contract deals. We have to remember that, as everyone I'm sure here who's tuned in knows, influencers are just individuals who are trying to make a living and really take pride in their own image and their own personal brand. So there should be no reason why the scales aren't balanced.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I would love to kick this off to Vanessa, who, has really been a trailblazer in this space and probably has one of the first ones to put these clauses in creator deals. Vanessa, when did you first start, advocating for these type of terms, and, why do you feel creators deserve these type of clauses?
So we've always been pushing for, mutual terms that will benefit our clients. I mean, that's our primary goal as talent representatives, to make sure that we are protecting that party in any sort of agreement or relationship. I would say that obviously as of late, it has become even more important that this is something that is a big part of the discussion and is something that we are able to include in contracts going forward. I would say brands are still reticent to accept terms like this. But we are able to make a stronger case these days, given that we have a lot of recent examples of brands and their, quote unquote, inappropriate or bad behavior being brought into a more public forum, and specifically on social media. So I actually have been able to recently point to a media property who was giving me a lot of pushback for including this clause agreement, I actually said, well, just a few weeks ago, your editor-in-chief of, I will not name the publication, was, recently in, a slew of media for this exact scenario in which we are trying to avoid. And we want to make sure that I'm able to distance my client from that publication, brand, company, et cetera, should that be the case. So while still an uphill battle, I would say, we're definitely getting a little bit more acceptance more recently.
And I want to throw it over to our attorneys on the panel. Alex from Venable, do you want to add in, when do you feel it's appropriate to sort of ask for this? Because I feel depending on, if you have representation like an agency like DBA and you have an advocate, it's easier. Or if you have representation from an attorney, but we do have creators on this webinar who might be, working by themselves. Like, how do you manage that in that capacity?
Look, at the end of the day, the more protections that you can build into your contract, of course, the better. Your ability to have a robust contract that protects your IP rights, which Shay could talk about at length, I'm sure, that protects you in the event that the brand violates the contract, and that gives also protections to you in the event, as we're talking about today, the brand does something that can tarnish your personal brand. But all of that is a reflection kind of three things. First, if you have representation for someone to advocate for you that has experience like a talent agency or an attorney. Second, whose template are you starting from? That's something that I think does make a difference at the end of the day. But third, and most important, is what is the bargaining power between the parties? And that's, of course, the core issue, and something that Vanessa and others that probably are dealing with all the time. But, some of the content creators that I've worked with, that Vanessa's worked with, have a lot of leverage, and their bargaining power is equal, and in some cases greater than the brands. And they, of course, can insist on strong protections, and including a very strong morality clause that reflects their personal values. That may not be the case for someone just getting started, a micro influencer. And so, that is the reality. You can start with baby steps. Just getting some language in the document is helpful. The question is, how do you enforce it? And I think at a minimum, you should be able to get out of the contract, get out of the relationship in the event there is something that develops that causes a divide between you, the content creator, and the brand. As your power in the relationship, as your profile and celebrity grow, the provisions get more complicated and almost penalize the brand for violating the morals clause. And some of those nuances to how you enforce the morals clause is really, I think, something that you want to strive for, and where you have good representation can benefit you. But if you're just starting out, I think the baby step is asking for a morals clause that allows you to terminate the agreement and just walk away in the event it's violated.
And I want to get our creators heard. Patrick, would you want to talk a little bit about the considerations when a partner comes to you? Deals are getting a lot more complex. Creators are not just executing, a branded deal, just on Instagram. Most creators are being asked to be a spokesperson, not in COVID times, but pre-COVID, to make, public appearances, to even, private label their name on merchandise. I think as deals get more complex, the need to have more protection is critical. we would love to hear from you on your experience in terms of adding more complexity and the need for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like what Alexandra said, these are considerations like, and also to echo Vanessa, like the goal in any of these conversations is really to create the most protection and the most value for myself as a creator, the other creators that I work with. We are in a position because of recent political and social events that we're both more, the sort of world is aware, we as creators are aware, and brands are more aware of the sort of possible negative repercussions of being connected to a brand that is acting in a way that you don't agree with, or that's inappropriate, or is outright racist. And so I think I do feel like we have more leverage and bargaining power than maybe we've seen before. And so for that, I think, that is definitely, I'm grateful for that. And that's at top of mind. One of the ways that we specifically have been thinking about our conversations with brands, and this is maybe a slightly different topic, because I think ultimately what we're trying to do is create the best scenario for everybody involved, right? And the way that I like to start these conversations with brands is really from the get-go, out of the gate, to really be talking to the brands, to have a very open and clear dialogue about what the brand is doing to ensure that their activities are such that I would agree with, that I would feel comfortable being in alignment with. For example, if we have, I have a small roster of talent that I represent with my agency, and if we feel, regardless of who the talent is, we feel very strongly about the fact that we want to be working with brands who are very inclusive and who are not just not doing bad things, but are also proactively doing their best to be leaders in the space of inclusivity and diversity, respecting diversity. So we really have strong conversations about who else is in this campaign. Can you talk to us about the other talent that you're including? Because it's really important for me that not only am I aligning with a brand that I generally like for myself, but I'm aligning with a brand that I agree with their values, and that other people who are involved are also talent that I'm sort of aligned with and agree with. So, I think basically all of these things are sort of steps in a larger process to make sure that we as creators are doing our due diligence to make sure that we're fully protected, that we're understanding the situations that we're getting ourselves into, and that we're just being very thoughtful about how we proceed in business relationships in general. So obviously the contractual aspect of this is a hugely important one, but so are all of the other conversations.
And now I would love to, you touched on, the inclusion factor, and I would love to get Shay's input. She's co-chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for the Grammys board in Atlanta. And cancel culture, Black Lives Matter. I think creators have truly rose to the occasion. And, you have Black Lives Matter allies and wanting other creators to have equal opportunities. And so I've, been approached by creators who are like, I want my friends to have the same opportunities I'm having. What can I do? And so Shay, I would love to hear from you how you've been, seeing these kind of clauses, and especially when we get to the inclusion writer, how you've been dealing with this with your clients.
I think that these are, as Alex mentioned, these are pretty standard at a certain point with the caliber of clients that you're dealing with, especially with the amount of leverage that a celebrity has, that a mega influencer has. And so these are really standard. I think something that's kind of not on the radar, but directly connected to each of these different clauses that we have yet to actually talk about is language in these agreements around derivative rights. That I have produced some kind of content for you specifically in connection with a campaign, but deep within the contract language, it says that they have the right to make a derivative, any kind of derivative work for their own promotional purposes. And now in the midst of cancel culture or some faux pas, you become the face because you're that one creator of color, you're that one member from the LGBTQ community that has done a campaign with them. And all of a sudden they make you the face of their mea culpa, you know, and that's not what you signed up for. You signed up to partner with them for a specific campaign, but because in the midst of your contract language, you agreed to give them derivative rights for their own promotional and marketing use, there's nothing you can really do there. So, you know, in addition, and it really, we're thinking reactively, and I think as Patrick talked about, maybe there's a company who's trying to be proactive and say, hey, before something happens, we want to release this campaign to talk about how much we care about inclusion and communities, and then they make you a part of this campaign because they're holding on to your content. So it's not even necessarily that the brand has behaved badly just yet. It's just that they've tied you to messaging that you just didn't sign up for. And so I think that that's another layer of that conversation when we're talking about cancel culture and we're talking about being proactive and protecting our clients, or even if you're still at the stage where you need to review your own agreements, I think really looking at that derivative use language is going to be key.
And I would love for Summer to jump in, just because, you know, I feel that there aren't too many Muslim creators that are leading in this space. Have you ever experienced someone leveraging your assets, you know, in a way that you didn't necessarily agree to, just in terms of, you know, it being, you know, culturally relevant or real-time necessity?
Thank you. So actually, I have never experienced that specifically, which is really great. I think a lot of times when I'm working with a company, it'll be a lot of review. There'll be a lot of steps for reviewing the content before it goes out, and I'll always be a part of the messaging, especially because a lot of the times I've worked with companies in more of an interview format. So these are my direct words going into a video. I shot a campaign once for a company last winter about things I like to do in terms of the holidays and things like that. And so I was able to obviously say all the footage, see all the footage and review all of those edits and make sure that it turned into a creation that I would want published. So I'm very thankful to not have experienced that, but I know that this is something that concerns me when I do work with companies, especially when giving them the rights to use your intellectual property in their own branding. And I think that's something I'm definitely concerned for the future, considering the movement towards being this like spokesperson of diversity and just wanting to have, you know, that token influencer as the face of your brand. So I think that these are some really important points to consider moving forward.
Now, when you think about negotiating, you know, a deal and like the best approach for negotiating mutuality in moral provisions, I would love to hear from Vanessa in how you think, you know, what's the best approach, because the brand is always, you know, me coming from the brand side, you're always going to fight for the brand's interest. And so how do you kind of align on terms that are mutually beneficial?
Right. I mean, first, you have to do it very diplomatically and very delicately, because a brand certainly does not want to be accused of any past bad behavior or necessarily want you to highlight something that they're obviously, you know, going to get very upset about. So, you know, just try and make sure that you're handling it very diplomatically and delicately. I would say that, a good negotiation tactic is just to speak to them. Obviously, my negotiation tactic is always human to human. My client's a human, you're a human over there on the other side. Let's talk about like what the actual consequences of something like this could be, and how it could negatively affect my client. I love to give examples of, certain situations that maybe I've experienced or the particular talent has experienced in the past, or just continue to give them a little bit more context as to, what could actually happen outside of the contract, off the page, in real life, or potentially even like how this could, spiral out of control on their social media page and continue to produce even further negative backlash towards the brand. So I try to sort of show them both sides to the story. And then, oftentimes you're up against a very, tough negotiator or another tough party on the other side. So, you're not always necessarily going to get exactly what you're looking for in any negotiation, but I try to think through, what can my client live with ultimately? If I'm not able to get everything, what could my client live with? Could he or she live with the fact that the content gets taken down from their social media page, but the brand retains the rights to use in a certain capacity for theirs or internally or whatever it may be? Like, clearly every side wants something. So I have to try and figure out what can I give the other party in order to get something that's more important for me.
And, that's where you want to try to build a relationship and a long-term partnership with a brand. It's in your best interest to try to find agreeable terms, but you don't want to take a deal that doesn't feel good. And so you want to exercise good judgment and do your due diligence on a company before you enter in an agreement. And I would love to ask Alex from Business of Fashion, when you were meeting with so many different creators and talent executives, what were some of the eye-opening findings of the subject matter from this article? Because everyone has such a unique point of view on these clauses.
Well, I think the biggest takeaway was that, as everybody has mentioned before me, that it's in everyone's best interest to find agreeable terms, and no one wants it to reach a sort of worst case scenario point where you have you have to be worried about enforcing the terms of the contract. So that was really where everyone was coming from. But beyond that, I think the thing I heard most frequently was, even for creators who did have representation or were newer to their representation teams, they wanted to be sure that they were being represented most fairly, and that their point of view was being understood, that they weren't being tokenized. That was something that came up frequently. And then for the creators who might not have representation, how they can go about implementing contract negotiations into deals is something that came up, and was really a question of, where do I even find reliable information, or who can I consult without spending more money to make sure that my contract is airtight, or at least gives me some kind of confidence about this brand deal that I'm entering into.
And I want to take it back to Shay, from how young of a concept is reverse moral clauses for creators? Like, would you say in the last 2 years these being negotiated a little bit more?
Yeah, I absolutely would. I'd say maybe 2 or 3, because I think we're now 3 years away from kind of the Me Too time's up. So I'd say, about the past 2 or 3 years. And it's, I just think that the business of influence is ever evolving. We are all learning on the job, both from a brand side and an influencer side, and we're applying principles from different areas of life as also the platforms evolved and, users evolve. And so I definitely would say that these are new considerations because it just wasn't a part of the conversation. It wasn't a part of the thought process when we were originally negotiating these deals, 9-10 years ago at the beginning of the quote unquote influencer space. It was just that you were negotiating blog deals, and there were not a lot of companies that had a corporate presence online. A lot of companies had not really embraced the online space just yet. They were only in traditional media vehicles. And so as these platforms have evolved and lots of entities have created a space on the platform, and then those who are associated with the entities maybe have gotten themselves in trouble on these various platforms, now all of this is kind of coming into consideration. So yeah, I would definitely say it's new the past 2 or 3 years. And I think the practice and the clauses that we'll be looking at will continue to evolve.
And I'm gonna get now to the inclusion rider. And this is a clause that I feel is just so important, especially if you are a non-creator of color, because you have the opportunity to be a change agent in this space and help your colleagues, because in the end of the day, your fellow creators are your colleagues. Summer, I would love to hear your POV on the inclusion rider, and in terms of this type of clause. What's your experience with it? Why do you think it's important?
Well, I think that this is something that, as we discussed earlier, is more reflective of the times lately. I think that this is something very, a lot of companies are getting in touch with the inclusion rider. And I personally have not experienced much of this amount of diversity when it comes to being behind the cameras, who's working with you on the team. I mentioned earlier in our conversations, once I went to a campaign shoot and they had a hairstylist there ready for me for the campaign, even though that was something that had been communicated before. So I really think that there is like a lot of work to go when it comes to understanding the diverse viewpoints that the influencers bring. And I think that it's very important to have these types of inclusive clauses when it comes to working with a company. I started working with a company on an ambassadorship recently, and these were the questions I had before signing that contract. Like, who is included behind the scenes? Who is being hired to actually be in the campaign? What are you doing in your workplace? And so I think that it's really important as brands and bloggers to ask these questions, because like you said, these are your colleagues and you want the best of opportunities for them as well.
Now, Patrick, being a creator who is not of color, have you tried to leverage these terms to, get more diversity on some of the campaigns that you've been a part of?
I've actually not tried including an inclusion rider, and it's definitely something that I should. As I kind of mentioned before, the conversations that I've had have been a little bit more kind of just business and creative conversations. So I've had these conversations with the brands that I'm working with, but have not taken the step of this inclusion rider to make it legally binding. But I think just to kind of like answer a larger question, like to me, this is hugely important because ultimately what is being stipulated specifically in this slide is very much aligned with my own point of view and my own worldview and what I want to project and what I believe is right. And so I think that it's really great just sort of even here in this meeting, to really understand what the opportunities are to take something from the ability, from the perspective of me just personally feeling strongly about these issues and wanting to sort of like fight for this type of inclusion, and how we can also make that more of a kind of like legally binding obligation, or at least hopefully so, in that negotiation process.
And I want to turn this to Alexandra from Business of Fashion. How serious do you think fashion creators are taking inclusivity into account? Because I think with Black Lives Matter, we saw our feeds transform, and everyone was, hyper ignited, and then the sizzle, that it has kind of sizzled down. Do you feel the industry, is this something that people are taking really serious, or is it one of those things in some of your interviews is a trend?
So I would hate to put down anyone's efforts in promoting diversity and inclusion, but as with a lot of things, there's an outrage cycle where, you stomp your feet and you shake your fist in the air and you say, this isn't fair and we have to do something about this. And then quickly you're distracted by another issue going on in the world. So there have been some strides. We see some influencers, or I have seen some influencers that were called out really early on in the summer for being less inclusive than they projected on their social media pages, who have really taken a step back, and in fashion specifically, been sure to make sure that when they're promoting products, they're promoting Black-owned businesses and brands, that they're highlighting other creators in a way that is not just such that they're using them to gain some sort of credibility with their own followers. Having said that, there's plenty of room to improve. And I think, the people who are going to do that sort of hands to the fire, feet to the fire accountability tasks are their followers. So it's really going to impede on their own engagement if they're not walking the walk. So there's definitely room to improve. The first step, I think, for any creator, whether you have representation or not, is to ask about inclusivity in the brand deals that you're working on. And then on your own page, I think that there really needs to be a mindset shift away from maybe singularly promoting your own photos or your own work, and bringing in other, whether it's photographers or stylists on, the creator shoot, who are people of color or who are diverse in other ways, whether it's bisexual orientation or what have you. So there are other ways aside from highlighting Black faces or people of color's faces on feeds, such that the industry is cumulatively more diverse.
I absolutely agree, and I'm going to try to launch a poll if I can. Let's see if this works. To our attendees, were morality and inclusion clauses on your radar before attending the Lunch and Learn? If you want to chime in, and let's see. And yes, if we get to, some people are getting to question 2. All right, I'm gonna end the poll. See if that works. I will share the results at the end. And Shay, I would love to hear your opinion. How have the inclusion writers changed the conversation in the entertainment industry from a legal standpoint?
I don't think that this is a part of the conversation right now, just to be honest, for there to even be a quote unquote change as of yet. I think similar kind of to the poll that you just gave, that it's not on a lot of people's radars. It's kind of new information. People are very much in that space of like, oh my gosh, I really want to do something, but I don't know what. And so this is, I think that this is kind of that answer to it, but it's very similar to, gosh, I want to say that this was the late 90s, early 2000s with the corporate call to diversity. And it really started with Coca-Cola and Betty Crocker. And it was everything here that we're talking about in these inclusion riders where people who, Coca-Cola and Betty Crocker made the commitment that their vendors, their law firms, their third-party contracts, that there would be women that were a part of the team, that there would be people of color, like all these different things. And that really started with that corporate call to diversity back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I think it's finally transitioning itself over to entertainment, where a lot of things were swept under the rug. And now that that cover has kind of been pulled off, and people are coming and bringing themselves to task and saying, we want to do better. I just think that it's a new tool that's being presented, and the change has yet to be seen.
Now, Alex, from Venable, what in your area of expertise, you represent a lot of high net worth clients and political figures. How, what's your experience with the inclusion writer?
So, the demand to include such a rider in these agreements is certainly there, and I think it's grown, and it's almost become not the standard, but like posh. It's almost inappropriate to not try to get that in there. I think where the rubber meets the road is though how specific it is. And I think with a lot of these contractual provisions that we talk about, including the morality clause, being able to be specific as to how you define, meeting the agreement terms, and what it actually looks like to have achieved the diversity that you as an influencer would like to see in your counterparty is really important. And so, having the broad language, it's very diluted, and it's very easy for your counterparty to say we comply. But if you get more specific and have a real standard built into the agreement, I think there you can actually then have objectable goals to hold your counterparty accountable to. And whether or not you decide to enforce it, of course, will also be reflective of the bargaining power in the relationship. But we are increasingly seeing, very influential content creators be able to hold their counterparty accountable. And as that grows, it'll trickle down to, less influential, less known influencers, and that's certainly the long-term goal of this campaign, to get inclusion riders standardized and known, so that a counterparty will be almost embarrassed to not agree to it. And I think that's kind of where we are, and certainly it'll take a few more years, as Shay mentioned, before it's really universal.
And I would love to hear from Vanessa. Have you ever had a brand, since you work with mostly blue chip clients, have you ever had, an influencer, really want such a writer in agreement and someone not want to execute towards it? I would love to hear from your perspective.
Sure. As Alexandra said, it's not quite standardized just yet to have an inclusion rider in a contract, but it's 100% part of the pre-vetting conversation that we're having with the buyers. Our clients are very stringent in that if they do not receive information that aligns with, what it is that their goals are and their beliefs and their ethics, they will not accept a campaign. And the embarrassment factor that Alexandra also mentioned, is definitely a tactic that we use even before bringing an opportunity to our clients, because if we ask that question, are there, underrepresented groups involved in the campaign, or is everybody in the campaign a straight white woman from the Midwest? And their answer is yes, then I'm going to highlight that that's a problem and that they might need to rethink their casting efforts and the way that they want to roll out this campaign, because A, it's going to look poorly on you, and B, you're going to have a really hard time casting, more premium talent that do care about these things, and talent that do have the leverage to say, I'm not going to accept this campaign. I don't need this job from you right now. I'd rather work with another company that falls in line more with what I want to represent.
Now I want to make time for Q&A, and so we have some questions that came in, and one is from Kelly Sachs, and she asked, as a seasoned creators, you've probably seen it all by now. Any code reds creators should learn to spot out when securing a brand deal? And she's directing this question towards Patrick or Summer. So one of you guys would like to take that on.
The thing, we're specifically talking about this kind of the morality clauses, inclusion, et cetera, but there are like a whole host of things that we could discuss in terms of how this whole process works in terms of vetting a potential client and what are the things that we're looking for. I think the important thing, I don't know that there's I'm sure, I think any of us could identify what any sort of code red things are. There's companies that are blatantly putting out messaging that is wrongheaded, that is racist, that is a whole host of things that I think that we could very easily dismiss kind of outright, or companies that have a very sort of have a very prominent support for issues, political parties, for President Trump that I would not agree with. So I think obviously there are some code red things, but I think what's more important to think about here is what are really defining your own values as a creator. And that has everything to do from your aesthetic values, to your lifestyle values, to your monetary ambitions. There are a whole host of things that are a part of this negotiation process. And it's really about understanding where your kind of barometer is, and where, the kind of lines that you're drawing for yourself, because this is all a negotiation. Even these ideas of what you can include or not include in a contract, ultimately, one party is going to have more or less bargaining power, as we're sort of talking about. So sort of every step along the way, whether it's just from understanding, I get this really weird email from a person who doesn't really seem to fully be able to have a business conversation, that's code red, to this is a brand that I really want to work with, and I actually really love the brand, but there are some specific things about how the brand is currently handling themselves, or other sort of the rate's too low or whatever it is, that ultimately I have to sort of pass and say no. So I think it's actually easier to see the code red things than it is to sort of move through this whole negotiation process and understand where you fall on the other things.
I completely agree. I think that nowadays the code red has become something a lot more obvious than it was in the past, especially because a lot of people are very vocal online when it comes to their point of view about brand, whether it be pages that are kind of news sources, but I guess there's a lot of media surrounding the brands that have a more public image online now. So you're able to see criticism live, whether it be in the comments. And I think it's so important to do your research, because oftentimes you might innocently work with a company not knowing about all of this backlash that comes with it. So a code red would be to search, do your research, make sure that there is no backlash associated with the company beforehand. And as you mentioned, I think it all comes down to the bargaining power. Feel free to talk to a company and let them know, hey, I've heard XYZ based off of these platforms. What are you doing to address these issues? There's nothing wrong with taking that power into your own hands, because at the end of the day, they want to work with you for a reason. And so you have that bargaining power. And of course, it does differ depending on the brand, but I think especially in these times, it is more of an option for a lot of people to spot those code reds and address them directly with the company and not be shy.
I want to add one thing that I think is really important for any creator in this space that I've heard through the reporting. to take a step back before getting excited about whatever the brand is that's reached out to you, whatever the offer is, and what you think it can do for your career, and ask yourself why they're interested in partnering with you now, especially if you're a diverse creator or your background is diverse. What are they getting out of their relationship with you versus what you're getting out of your relationship with them? Make sure you're not being used. And if you be open to having those conversations with the brand partners themselves, and just leveling with people in, of course, a professional way, but in a very transparent way, to make sure that everybody is on the same page and what your expectations are for the project align.
And we also got a question from Eric Hercules. He is a creator, but also has an agency like Patrick. He said he's new with an agency, and he would love to know, how do you hold creators responsible and accountable according to the terms of the morality clauses?
A lot of it also is just education. I mean, so some of the terms in the contract, like, misbehaving, is common sense. And I think, Vanessa's clients, my clients would, understand them. But some other provisions of these contracts where they represent and warrant that they'll be in compliance with certain laws or regulations, which is my area of expertise, it just requires a little education of what that means. What are they actually agreeing to? What are these other laws and regulations that are not in the four corners of the contract that are being referenced in the contract that they need to be mindful of? And the one that jumps out to me, of course, is FTC's requirements that you disclose the material connection with the brand in your posts. That may not be spelled out in the contract. It may just say you'll comply with the law. And so my job and Vanessa's job is to kind of educate our clients as to what are those boundaries and what does it look like to be in compliance, so that they, don't inadvertently trip some of these terms and breach with, unknowingly.
Exactly. We're constantly educating our clients, and even the brand side as well, because they're not always up to snuff, but on what our best practice is. And like you mentioned, FTC, that's constantly evolving. So we're constantly sharing that information with our clients. We go so far as to do workshops with them. We bring in experts. We have them sit down with our legal teams. I mean, again, we take this stuff very, very seriously. And so, like you said, educating them on what they're signing, what the best practices are, and what it actually means in real world, like terms, is really important.
And we have a question from Natalie Silverstein from We Are Leaving Early. And she asks, as new creators, are there any tactics you would have used to push larger clients to take a stance on social issues? And I guess I will take that maybe to Shay, because she has a good breadth of clients.
As a newer creator, we're talking about leverage. What kind of leverage do you have if you're new? I think it's completely different, at the level of clients, that Vanessa has, and, like maybe Patrick and the people that I work with. It's like, yeah, we're not aligning until you say something. I'm not continuing this brand partnership. I am Black. I am a woman. I need to know if my life matters to you before I continue with this project. But that's a completely different conversation when you have the actual social influence to do it, because the real question here is, what do you bring to the table? And so what will this brand lose should you walk away? And so if you cannot clearly articulate that on any level, whether you're new or experienced, there's not much you can do to push a brand to take a stance that they don't actively want to take. I mean, you can always send a notice. You can always start your own campaign about how it's important. But I think when you're talking about pushing a brand, you really need to understand your own leverage, where you sit at the table, and what the brand stands to lose if you do kind of threaten them with saying, hey, I need you to take a stance or else I'm walking away.
We have time to take one more question, and this is coming from Chrissy Harris. And she says she's just starting to be offered paid work. What she's looking for any advice from the panel. So maybe maybe two people can tackle that. I'll let anyone who wants to help Chrissy out.
I'll chime in first. I mean, obviously, as a younger, newer creator, I think what has kind of been echoed throughout this conversation, there are going to be various stages in which you are, in which you have less leverage because you're beginning out and you don't necessarily have the ability to command the prices or the negotiations in the contracts that you want. And it really is just about, I think educating yourself is very important. So understanding like what all of these things are, being able to read a contract if you don't have somebody who's on your team or if you don't have a team to help you do that, finding legal help, hiring a lawyer, so you can educate yourself. And then it's really about, from my perspective, being a manager, I just talk a lot to my talent and my clients about how are you shaping your brand? What are you doing to continue to create an impact through your creative work so that you can continue to grow and then be able to, at a certain point in the future, have more opportunities in the future.
Yeah, and I would just add, since we've talked about leverage a lot, like you don't necessarily have to be like the most premium A-list creator with the biggest name and the most following to have leverage. You can find your own leverage in your own way as a new creator. And I think a really good way to do that is to have a proof of concept. So whether you can reference, how many swipe ups you got in an organic mention for that brand, or accept gifting and a trackable link, and actually show what it is that you can do, like what is your offering as a creator, whether it's things like sales and conversion or impressions or stellar content or whatever it is, messaging, whatever that is. Find that, find your headline. I always like to call it like, what is your headline? What do you offer that's different than everyone else? What's your, the offering? And then find a small test way to do that with that company. And if you perform and you achieve what it is that you say that you can achieve, that's your leverage. Again, you don't have to have that big name or a million followers. What they want to work with you for a reason, give them more reasons to want to work with you.
And that concludes our first Creator Lunch and Learn. I want to thank our esteemed panel for joining us. I felt like there were a lot of awesome new things that were brought to the forefront of this conversation, new clauses that Shay touched upon. And so I want to thank everyone for their time. Thank you for signing up. And there will definitely be part 2 of this. And thank you for Alex from Business of Fashion for being a conversation starter, and keep it going until we meet again.